What shocked me was they didn't build their wealth with the stock market. They were building their wealth through business acquisition. So what's this? What's going on? What are you up to? Tell them what you're up to. Just say, I'm actually looking to acquire my first small business. There's 3 pillars that the business has to fit. First off, it has to be recession resistant. The second one is going to be recurring revenue. Third one is you want a moat or barrier to entry for that business. I did one deal, halfway knew what I was doing, and still I ended up doing pretty well. I didn't go into debt to do it. And that one deal was making me almost $200,000 in cash flow a year later.
I think this is something that so many people who may be stuck in the 9-to-5, or even if you don't have access to capital, that's one of the things we're going to talk about, is the fact that you don't have to be a millionaire to go buy one of these $500,000, $800,000, $1 million, $2 million businesses. There's so much false information out there. So I'm super stoked to learn about that. Before we jump in, can we get a little bit of your origin story? How did you get to where you are buying these businesses and living the life that you're living, man?
I started out where I was getting out of the Army. I was an intelligence officer, got out, got my MBA, thought I would go the corporate gig, and that would be the end of it. About 2 years into it, I was in the private bank, which is basically the part of JP Morgan where they just deal with people that have well over $10 million in liquid net worth. So these are very, very wealthy individuals. And what shocked me was they didn't build their wealth with the stock market. They didn't build their wealth through the common investment advice that you hear from a lot of guys online. Mostly, they were building their wealth through business acquisition. And that's where they were getting the majority of their wealth coming from. Now, they would take that wealth, they would spread it all around in different areas, but that's how they really became wealthy in the first place. And so I kind of got me thinking, okay, I'm looking at the cream of the crop in terms of the wealthy in the area that I was living. This is what they did. Maybe I should look into it. And so I started reading a book called Buy, Then Build, like Wally Dible. I went on YouTube, which back then there wasn't really too much about it. There was a handful of videos that really didn't have many views. So I decided, okay, I'm going to continue working here and try to find my first deal. I went on LinkedIn, messaged a bunch of people. Every week I was messaging different business owners. I didn't even know what I was looking for, honestly. And finally I connected with someone who was also an Army vet. He was a warrant officer and got out and was in software working for Intel, but then started his own software company that focuses in fitness space. And we connected, then went to have coffee. One thing turned into another where I ended up coming on and taking a minority stake in that company for $5,000 and a bunch of sweat equity that I had at work to build the company. And it went from $10,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue to now well over $130,000 a month in recurring revenue. It was a great first deal because I had $5,000 that I could put towards something. And so it was limited downside. I would just lose my $5,000, which would have been big at the time, but I didn't go into debt to do it. And I really just did a bunch of sweat equity, built the company, and then extracted myself out of it after a year. And that one deal was making me almost $200,000 in cash flow a year later. And I'm still working at W2. So that kind of showed me just the power of, wow, okay, I did one deal, halfway knew what I was doing, was kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and still I ended up doing pretty well. So maybe if I get better at this, I can do even better. And so that's when I started doing more and more acquisitions. Now, 5 years later, here we are.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about how to do this. I think when people think of acquiring a business, they think it's ridiculously out of reach or something that's above my ability. And while that latter part might be true, that doesn't mean that you can't get into it, learn about it, figure out how to do it and make it happen. We talk about boring businesses. So what are the businesses that you target for acquisition first and foremost?
Yeah. So that's usually the biggest question they get when someone's trying to get into the space. They're like, okay, you convinced me that this is a way to build wealth, but what should I buy? Right? There's literally thousands of different industries. Some that just a business. So what I do instead of telling people, hey, buy these three businesses, what I tell them is there's 3 pillars that the business has to fit. First off, it has to be recession resistant. And the way I explain this is if you were to have your salary cut in half for whatever reason, what would you still have to buy? What would you still have to use? What services would you have to use at your house when your AC goes out or toilet's not flushing? Or you would still pay for those things because those are essential to your quality of life, right? They're not nice to haves, they are need to haves. So we want to focus on that. The second one is going to be recurring revenue. So it doesn't have to be monthly recurring revenue, but I focus on businesses that the client is going to pay me more than once per year for whatever service it is. So you want at least 2 times a year that same client is paying you for a service. Third one is you want a moat or barrier to entry for that business. So an example of one that does not have a moat would be like the landscaping business that's sold $500,000 a year, because those are guys who are really just kind of mowing people's lawns. And Most of us back in college, whenever I did, I mowed lawns, and I worked for a landscaper, and I would go out there with a push mower and I'd mow people's lawn. So your competition is any guy that can go to Home Depot and buy a $200 lawnmower. So that's a race to the bottom of prices. So landscaping companies have bought $1 million in revenue. Now they can do large jobs where now you can average Joe with a mower kick. So it's a little bit different. But I want to focus on deals where there's some type of barrier to entry. It could be expensive to get started in the industry. Could be a knowledge gap that it would take someone years to figure out how to do it to where they can actually sell that service. So you want something where when, Joe and Bob are talking one night and they're like, it'd be a good idea. This does this. And then someone can step in and be like, to get that off the ground, you're going to have at least like 200 $300 just so you can take out your first customer. And then I want them to be like, oh man, I guess not. That's what we're looking for when we're looking at buying the right type of business.
Okay. And before we there's kind of a list I want you to go through about how you do this, but one of the things I think it's on my mind, but it's probably on a lot of our listeners' minds already is how do I pay for an acquisition? Can you give us an example of one of your like basic acquisitions, the cost on it, the price of it, how you financed it, if you financed it, how does that all work? Let's knock that one out.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to pull out the typical structure that people are going to do for their first deal. As you do more deals, the structures change because the more deals that you have, the more leverage you have, and you're able to go in and get deals done that are way more favorable to you as you have more experience and you have more assets. It's the same thing with real estate investing, same thing with anything else, right? But for your first deal, the typical structure is going to be 80-10. 80% SBA, 10% seller note, 10% buyer injection of capital or investor injection.
In SBA, we're talking Small Business Administration loan?
Correct. You're talking about SBA 7A acquisition. Correct.
Got it. Sorry, continue.
So that's the structure. So 80-10-10. So typically when someone finds an average deal size, let's call it $1 million. The SBA only goes up to about $5 million. So it's usually $5 million and lower. And most deals for the people that I work with that are in my community, they're pretty much doing between $800,000 in purchase price, probably $2.5 million. That's probably the span that most people are doing. And the 80-10-10 is usually, I would say, about 70% of these deals are structured. So 80% will be the SBA 7A loan, something that you would go through the process, you qualify for. They want to make sure that there's someone who has some type of management experience. They want to make sure that you have a criminal record. There's things that they go through that are normal checks. So look at your credit score. But they're basically betting that you're going to be a person that can step into the ownership of this business and not running it to the ground. Right? So you have to really sell yourself and your expertise and experiences, whatever job you were working, what are the skill sets you learned, so then you can apply it to this business. Okay, so that's one. Now, that takes away 80%. Now, the 10% that I mentioned, the first 10 is a seller finance note. That's where the seller is giving a loan to you to buy their business. Okay, so you're making payments to the bank for the SBA, and you're making separate payments to the seller. Now, that structure is between you and the seller. That structure could be 3 years long, 5 years long, 10 years long, 7% interest, 0% interest. It could be anything, right? Whatever you and him or her agree to, that is what that's going to be. And then you're left with 10% left. Now, there's ways in which you can structure, and this is getting a little more easily, but there's ways you can structure that seller note to where if you structure it where it's on full standby, means no payments start for the seller note for the life of the SBA loan. So you're not going to make a payment to that seller on that note for 10 years because the SBA note is 10. And if they agree to that, then this SBA or the lender, the SBA lender, will then count that 10% seller note. Another 5% they'll count towards your injection of equity. So now you only have to bring 5%. And so there's ways to structure where you can lower your down payment. So, but in the simplest structure, 80, we talked about the 10, and then the last 10 is the buyer injection or an investor that's going to come alongside you of capital to get the deal done. And that's just like a plain vanilla structure that every deal will qualify to do.
Wow. Okay. And I just want to make it clear that there's obviously ways to get creative financing, right? That has 3 different ways right there. That's the SBA, the seller note, and your own injection. And even through your own injection part, if that number is 10, 15, 20K, whatever that number is, you can still get creative on how you finance that money too, right? There's ways to be able to get it done without feeling like you have to come to the table with a ton of money already.
Correct. Like I would say most people that are inside of my community get deals done are getting deals done with less than $100,000 out of their pocket, many times less than $50,000 out of their pocket to get fully out the door. Now, there's others that are putting down a couple $100,000 for larger deals, and there's others that are putting zero down because they structured it with an investor. Now, one of the cool things I think that when I bring up investors, people are always like, "Oh, well, that's easy for you to say. You know people that have money." And I get it. Everyone has different networks, right? Some people have family members that can easily invest. Some people that don't have family members that can easily invest. But when we're looking at deals, I didn't have any family members that could invest. Nothing on my first deals, right? It was me going out and networking on LinkedIn. Right? And this is what I did. I spent an hour a day sending a bunch of messages in mail to a bunch of different people, jumped on a bunch of different calls. And over time, you eventually get people that will start to understand what you're trying to do and build it up. And I tell people for the first deal, if you want to raise money, never raise money before you don't have a network, that, a rich uncle who says he'll put money into the deal. This is how you start. Everyone can do it. Is you learn what you want to do with the acquisition, right? So let's say you want to buy an accounting firm, it's going to cost $1 million, and here's what the cash flow is going to be after all debt service and everything else, right? So let's say it's going to make $200,000 cash flow. Well, then everywhere you go to, whether you go to church, you're going to play pickleball with somebody, whatever your activities are, when someone says, "Hey, dude, what's going on? What are you up to?" Tell them what you're up to. Okay. Just say, "Hey, you know what something's interesting? I'm actually looking to acquire my first small business." It's so outside the norm that it's not going to be like, they're going to do a double take. Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by a small business? Like, how? And they're going to say, "Okay, this is how." And they're going to be like, "Why? Never heard of someone doing that." Or, "Would you not an accountant? How would you buy an accounting firm?" "Well, this is how." "Wow, I didn't realize that. What did the returns look like?" "They look like this." "Wow, it's way better than anything else that I know about. Let's schedule a time where we can go for coffee and you can tell me a little bit more about what you're doing here." I promise you, if you go out there and just say what you're planning on doing, you're not asking them for money. You're not saying, "Hey, do you have $100,000 you can give me for this deal?" You're not doing any of that. You're just talking about what you're doing. If you do it enough times, you're going to have someone who comes back to you and goes, "Hey, do you know what you told me about the acquiring that small business? I'm interested in learning more about that. Let's set up some time that I might have some money that I've been putting away just for something. This might be something I would want to put into." Promise you, you're going to do that if you talk to enough people. So for anyone who's thinking that they don't have any access to capital or no investors around them, I promise you're wrong. Just go out there, live your life, tell people what you're doing, and you will attract the right people to you.
So much of what you try to do in business or in life is just telling people what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because A, you're going to get the network effect, you're going to grow your network, but B, if you tell enough people, even if none of those people that you tell are investors or the proper fit, now you have access to their network because they're going to be like, "Hey man, that sounds cool, but I've got this dude who's actively trying to invest. Can I connect you?" Right? That's the key. So I love that you mentioned that.
Absolutely.
All right, so I want to talk about getting into the nitty gritty here. What are the steps to like actually identify the business that's right to acquire? Like when you're set on this, you got a little bit of capital, you maybe even have some people lined up. How do you go decide, or how do you actually go about deciding if the businesses you've targeted are ripe for acquisition?
Yeah, great question. So once you go out there and using the three pillars that we mentioned before, recession-resistant, recurring revenue, barrier to entry, you're going to go out there and you're going to search on market, and if you know how to do it, off market, right? And so you're going to go out there and business acquisition, like real estate, like a lot of other opportunities, is a numbers game. The more numbers you dial, the more people that you talk to, the more brokers that you have conversation, the more likely a deal that fits your parameters and comes, right? So it's all about putting in graphs. You're not going to go out there and just spend 10 minutes a day, talk to one broker, and expect to get a deal done in a year. It's just not going to happen, right? So you have to go out there. We tell everyone who's in my community, we tell them at least an hour a day, Monday through Friday. That's the minimum. So go out, pick up the phone, look out listings, call brokers, talk to sellers. The more reps you put in, the more reps that are going to lead to an actual deal that's going to come to you. So now let's say you find a deal. It fits your parameter. It's $1 million accounting firm, or let's say it's a car wash or whatever, pest control. And so that comes to you. And you're like, "I think this is good." What's going to happen is you're going to say to the broker, "I'm interested." They're going to say, "Sign this NDA." You're going to sign this NDA. And then they're going to send you CIM. confidential information memorandum. It's basically a 30-page sales listing for this business. It's going to go over the overview of the business, go over the industry, it's going to go over their financials, kind of like a snapshot of the last 3 years. It's going to go through what the management structure looks like. It's going to tell you what business is selling, and it's going to sell it. It's going to polish it up, right, to be as good as possible because it's trying to sell. And so once you get that, you're going to be able to go through it, and you're going to come up with questions, and then you're going to reach back up to the broker to get asked those questions. Questions that we typically ask in the first conversation is going to be, hey, is this SV pre-qualified? Which means that this broker is already taking this business to a lender. They said, hey, we just qualify for a loan from your bank, and the lender looks at financials and says, yeah, I would qualify. And so now they can market it as SV pre-qualified. So now you don't spend all this time bringing it to a bank and they're like, we're not going to. And so that's one. Two is, what does the management structure look like post-acquisition? You don't want to be buying a business where the owner is retiring and gone and there's nobody else doing it. It's like maybe 2 other people and the owner was working 50, 60-hour weeks because you're inheriting that job, right? You're going to be buying a 50, 60-hour week job. Most people do not want to do. So out of 100 listings that we look at, you're probably finding 2, maybe 3 that qualify for what you're looking for. Financials are healthy enough, and you're not going to be buying a full-time job. Now, if you want to be an owner-operator, that's fine. There's plenty out there where you would give you an owner-operator or a job managing business. But for the most part, people are coming into this not wanting to take out a full-time job, maybe a part-time job, and kind of managing it and be able to build up their portfolio. So you're looking for something that has an existing team, an existing GM in place, or what I like to do is get the seller to stay on for at least a year or 2 as the GM. So there's very minimal transition, choppiness going on. While that gives you time to then find someone to replace them. And so those are structures we're looking for. But once you get that send and you like it, you're asking those questions. If those questions are all good, and an offer called an LOI, a letter of intent, it's not binding. Basically putting numbers to paper. Saying, hey, I want to buy this for $1 million. This is how I would structure it. I want you to stay on for a year. Here's the main things on top. If the seller then says, yeah, that sounds good, he'll sign it. And then at that point, you're under contract. And once you're under contract, now you start the diligence period. We try to go for at least 30 days, so 45 days or more is really good. The more time you have, the better you'll be able to understand that this is the right business. You're going to do a quality of earnings, which is basically going to look at all of their financials for the last 3 years, bank statements, tax returns, P&Ls, everything, AR statements, EP statements, and you're going to be basically recreating a cash flow picture, right? Not you, someone knows what they're doing, will be doing that. And then you'll be able to know, hey, this thing's actually making $200,000 a year, or it's actually only making $75,000 a year. This thing is not advertised correctly. Most of the time, the broker is not doing any of that diligence. So they're just kind of going off of P&Ls. And then they're saying, hey, this thing is making $500,000 a year. And on average, after you do a QOE, it's usually making at least $100,000 less than what he's saying. So always do a QOE. Once you figure that out, you do it, you're just going to a site visit, you're talking to the team, you're basically doing as much diligence as possible to make sure that you're inheriting a healthy team, healthy product or service, with healthy cash flow, with a healthy business. And then you work with the lender, you get all the information they need, and then about 10 days later from the time you started the process, the business hopefully closes. You know, or the business are. So it's very simplistic the way I put that all together, but that is roughly the stages that it's going to.
Is a huge part of the diligence period, I think you mentioned like employee interviews. Is it incumbent upon the acquisition, the buyer to, or do they have access to the employees to like interview them and make sure that, hey, A, are you a good employee? What do you do around here? Are you going to stick around if I buy this place? Where does that fall into that diligence period?
Yeah, so the employee and management structure is one of those important parts of the diligence, because it doesn't matter if the cash flow looks great after the QOV. If you're inheriting a bad team, it's not going to go well.
Right. There's a lot of toxic teams out there. That feels like a huge minefield.
You're absolutely correct. And let me caveat everything I'm about to say. There's no way to make the acquisition zero risk. There's always going to be risk. You're never going to know people's hearts. You're never going to know their minds. All you can do is try to limit your downside. And so when you're going into this, just know these people that work at this business, I'm sure all of you out there have worked at a business and didn't like your job or were not motivated. Guess what? Probably the same thing happening at this type of business. So it's your job as a new owner to go in there and be able, one, to inspire the team for the vision that you have in this business, right? Two, you're going to identify the main key players of that business. So let's say there's 10 employees in the business. They're not all key players. There might be one or two that are essential to that business running. The rest are just checking in and checking out. They're not doing anything above and beyond what they're told to do. But you might have one or two that if they left the business, you'd be in trouble because they're the ones who are really carrying everyone else on their back. So your job is to find out who those key people are. Then you're going to be approaching those key people and you're going to be saying, hey, look, this is my vision for what I'm trying to do. Here's how I see you be part of it. I'm going to inspire them. I'm going to motivate them. I'm going to paint a picture of where they can be if they stay on this team the next year, right? And then we're going to incentivize them. Incentivize them, say, hey, you stick on a retention bonus. You stay on for a certain amount of time, you're going to get X. And if you stay on for Y, then you're going to get Z. And they're going to be like, wow, that's more than the other owner ever. He never even gave me the option. I've been here 5 years and never got any kind of bonus. Well, now they're incentivized where now if someone else is trying to poach them or another opportunity comes their way, very rarely that person is going to be offering what you're offering that person to stay. So you're going to have to be generous. You do not want to be stingy. You want to go out there, especially the first year or two. You're building a solid foundation for this team. You got to lead by example. A lot of times just going in there, raising everybody's salaries, picking out your key people, incentivizing them they'll be very stupid for them to not stay with you. So now, does that mean that they're guaranteed to stay with you? No, it does. But you're really trying to limit the downside and push everything in your favor for them to be here. So to answer your question, yes, there's risk there. You try to do everything to mitigate it. At the end of the day, there are free people that can make free choices.
How do you evaluate a business that you're looking to buy? So like along the lines of making the offer that's right for you as the person doing the acquisition, what does that look like?
Great question. So in general, small businesses will trade between 2 and 4x SDE. Okay, so SDE stands for seller discretionary earnings. So for the sake of this argument, just put it as SDE equals cash flow. Okay. So the reason why the term is SDE is because it's including not just what the sellers pay themselves as a salary, not just what they're paying themselves distributions, but also whatever they're using the business for their personal piggy bank gets included. Okay. So the owner is using the business to pay for their internet, for their car, for the vacation they took in the summer. All that is personal, right? That had nothing to do with business expenses. Those costs that get added back into the cash flow. Because the argument is, well, if you were the owner, you would have done those things would have been cash flow, but the owner decided to use them for things that were not business related. So that's what SDE is. SDE is that whole encompassing number. So
that's their salary. So let's say they W-2 themselves $100K. They distribute through distributions. They give themselves another $100K. So they're making $200K in salary earned plus distributions, and then maybe another $50K in other expenses that you mentioned that get calculated back in. So that number would be $250K.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. All right, sorry,
So
continue.
good. That was good that you broke that down. So $250K. So let's use that example. The SCE is $250K. So now we mentioned that it is usually 2 to 4x SDE. This is not a science. It's very much an art. And this is why there's so much opportunity in the small business space. It's not like real estate where I can point at a house and we can all know what the value of it is probably within 1 or 2. Because we look at the MLS, we look at comps, and that's what it is. Whereas business is, you can have the same business on the same street, the same amount of revenue. One's a 2x, one's a 4x. And so that's massively different in terms of what you're paying for. So this is where there's so much room to grow in this industry. And there's so much opportunity because it is not a mature market in that sense. So now looking at the business is doing 250 SE. Now the owner is working the day to day. He's working 40 hours a week. He's very integral. He's a key man. If he leaves, this thing falls apart. He has key relationships. If you were to buy this business, you're really taking a lot of risks because if he leaves, you're working 40 hours a week and you can try to catch these relationships you had just cheap than some of the small cracks. That would be more like a business. So $250K making times it by 2, $500,000 purchase price roughly. That business. Now that same business, let's say 250, but that owner is working maybe 5 to 10 hours a week. He is on the golf course 3 or 4 days a week. He owes some lunches. He does some marketing things where he goes out, meet people, get some customers, does some sales. That's them. Where his team, he has a manager that manages the day to day, sitting with the customers, managing the team, and he goes in the office to week and he immediately the meeting or two, checks in on how things are going. That business is developing with a 3 to 4x, right? That is where now, if you were to buy it, you're not like right in the trenches working 40 hours a week. Probably in the beginning working a lot to catch up and understand how things work, and then after that, slowly pull yourself out to be part time. That would be like I said, 3 to 4x. So that same 250s now, it's $750,000 business, potentially close to $2 million. And then you have the perfect 4x business for a lot of small businesses. That is a business where the owner is absentee. They're out of state a lot of times. They're ready to retire a couple of years ago. And they have a GM who's running everything. And a team that's running everything. And maybe they check in once a week with their GM to see how things are going. That is going to be a 4x business. So that's now $1 million plus business to buy. So you went from anywhere from a $500,000 business to $1 million plus, all depending on the management of that business.
Wow. Okay. So none of this has anything to do with top line revenue or gross profit, anything like that. It's all based on the SDE. That 2 to 4x range is all based on the SDE.
For the vast majority of small business transactions. So that's not inclusive though. Like for instance, if you're buying a SaaS company, they're going to trade at a multiple of the annual recurring revenue. So totally different with it. They're going to be valued. An accounting firm is going to be valued 1x the previous year's revenue. Nothing to do with cash flow. So there are certain industries where you get totally different multiples, totally different ways of valuing it. But in general, 75% of the businesses you're going to be looking at when you go on SMBmarket.com or you go on any one of those different websites is going to be 2 to 4x cash flow.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So let's say you've gone through these steps thus far. You did your due diligence. The deal's going to happen. You got a fair price. You got your financing lined up. You sign the papers. You are the new owner. What's the strategy look like? I think a lot of the things, or at least for me personally, but maybe a lot of people listening, like, I think the biggest scary thing would be, all right, how do I make sure that A, I don't run this into the ground, but B, what do I need to do in the first like 60, 90, 120 days to like really solidify the direction that I'm taking this business in? What's your strategy on that?
So once you take over the business, there's a couple phases. There's the, you want to break it down into kind of the crawl, walk, run, right phase. Usually, unless you're buying a 4x totally absentee business, you're going to spend the first 3 months very involved in learning, first 90 days, where you're just not making any major decisions, changes. You're just learning as much as you can. You're a sponge. You're getting to get to know everybody. You're getting their trust. You're building a rapport with your team, and you're just learning. The second phase is going to be the next 90 to 180 days, right? The next 3 to 6 months, where now you understand the business enough to start tweaking some things. Maybe making some decisions that fundamentally change maybe some service or testing things out. Maybe you're letting go a problem employee. Maybe you're trying to hire somebody else to replace them. So you're trying to now do some ownership type roles because now you're dangerous up to where you're understanding the business. After that, phase 2 is phase 3, which now you're almost a year out, right? You're 9 months to a year out from your acquisition. At this point, you understand the business pretty well. You understand your team. You know what's working, you know what's not working. And this is the point where you can either start making some drastic changes. If you're going to, adding a new service, or you're going to hire a new GM, get rid of the current one, get a new GM, or whatever, right? Now at a point where you can start to make some of those drastic. And so now to your question about how do you know what to do or anything else like that, if you've never run a business before, the good thing is you're picking businesses and industries where most people intuitively understand how it works. I'm not like, there's certain businesses that are way too complex for me, industries that are way too regulated, complex, where you need just agree to understand even how things work. I'm not going into those. I like just the boring, simple businesses, right? So if we take an accounting firm, for example, because that's one of the ones that I'm focusing on right now and I'm growing up. So an accounting firm, everyone probably, if you worked, you've done taxes or had your taxes done, right? So you know that's something that happens every year. And they basically take a bunch of documents from you, and then they do the magic, and then they submit it to the IRS. It's something that happens once a year for most people in terms of taxes. And there's bookkeeping, which everyone intuitively understands as well. They're making sure the business is locking all your expenses and income. The model is very simple, right? And so for most people, you don't give yourself enough credit. Then, yeah, if you thought about it for 10 minutes, you would understand about 90% of what it takes, how an accounting firm runs. Okay, now that you are jumping into ownership, yes, you're going to be researching, you'll be networking with other people that are doing it, and you're going to learn real quick what are some good practices, best practices, and what are some of the things you should implement. So once you get into that role, the good thing is that there's plenty of other people in the network around you. Like, for instance, people like once they acquire a business, well, I have like literally dozens, well over 100 at this point of other people who acquire business. They come network, right? And they say, hey, this is when working really well with my company. This didn't work well. It was a total waste of money. So don't do that. Or this or that. You're going to be able to bounce ideas off people that are in your shoes. And for the most part, it's one of those experiences in life where you're really going to be learning a lot by trial by fire. So until you had to do a payroll before, until you understand the responsibility that comes with owning a business and people's livelihood depending on the product or service that you're putting out, you only can compare so much, right? If you've managed people before, there's still like skill set to have. If you've been in sales, you've been in marketing, you've been in ops, all that stuff really helps for sure. But until there's nothing that really can prepare you for, this is not me. If something goes wrong, the buck stops with me. Right? There's no one I can run to say, you fix this. They want to pay them a lot of money to do it. You're the owner. And so that's something that's a mentality that people have to have. That is something that you don't have or don't want to have. Like, hey, I'm perfectly fine. And there's nothing wrong with just living a life, working it on YouTube, where you know exactly what you do 9 to 5. At 5 p.m., you're clocking out. Can't be bothered until 9 a.m. the next morning. And you do that for 30, 40 years and you retire, have a great life. There's nothing wrong. And there's people that's what they should do. And there's other people, myself included, I think you, Brien, and probably a lot of them that are listening to this podcast, where that's just not enough. It's not because it's not necessarily all monetary. It's not like, oh, I need more money. It's more of, I need to do something challenging where I am making the decisions. I'm the one who is leading my own life. Right. And that's usually the calling that a lot of us feel. And then we react by becoming an entrepreneur, whatever venture that ends up being. And so you definitely need to have a grit. You definitely need to have a fire about wanting to do this, because there's going to be days that are going to be rough. Something goes wrong at work, or this job didn't turn out well. We got a bad review, and now you're scrambling to try to make sure that gets fixed. And there's going to be months where you made less money than you thought. There's going to be months where you made way more money than you thought. And so the entrepreneur journey is a series of tops and valleys. It's going to be like amazing. Things can never go better. Oh my gosh, so sky is falling. What am I going to do? And it's going to do this. And over time, the more you get better at it, the more it levels out to where you just have, it's very rare for you to have a huge valley. Right? You might just have rolling hills at that point. That comes with practice. It also comes with you separating yourself, the way that you react. I know that was a lot. When I value myself much, I was preaching for girls. That's kind of the thought on that.
No, that's great. I think that's what every entrepreneur, we know that, we understand that, we hear it, we relate to it, but aspiring entrepreneurs especially, it's part of that mindset that you won't get it until you're in it, right? And until you either buy a business or you start a business or you're involved at the top level of a small business, you don't get it until you're there. But everything you said is so true. The buck stops with you. And that's when acquiring a business, you are now going to be the owner. You are the top dog at that business. And I think one of the cool things amongst all the entrepreneur friends that I have, everybody has this in common, is the fact that you have a team, if you have employees, these people are relying on you to steer this business in the proper direction so that they can put food on their table and that they can support their families. You have way more responsibility than just being a guy who owns a business or a gal that owns a business. There's so much more that goes into it that a lot of people don't think about, or even those who aren't entrepreneurs, they don't think about what the owners have to do and have to go through, have to consider all the choices, the hundreds of choices in a day or a week that need to be made to keep the business moving forward and growing. So I'm definitely glad you made that point. That's for sure. So as we start rounding out here, I kind of want to ask, what we talked about boring businesses. You mentioned CPA firms, accounting firms recently. What are the best business types? What are the top few business types that you would recommend targeting those looking to acquire a new business?
Yeah. So again, I always say accounting firms just because that's my main focus. Like even I've acquired 6 and we're only going to couple years. So that's a big push for us. But instead of saying, hey, just focus on these 3 types, I would go back to the pillars. But then I would say, like, for instance, last night on our community call, we had a guy right, who just acquired the flag installation company, right, in Denver, Colorado. And awesome business, right? I've never even looked at a sim for a flag installation company, but guess what? It does great margins. It's very much a niche. Comes with a bunch of equipment that'd be very hard to compete against. Been around for 20 plus years. And it's something that's continuing to grow year over year in a market that's growing. It just installs flags, flag poles, and flags, right?
Oh, okay.
So I always think, like, I see those flag poles outside of every building that are like 40 feet high. I wonder how they get installed. The guy who does that, right? And that's a business. And so you have just things like that where I never would have told someone to buy a flag installation. Just never even crossed my mind that was even a thing. But yet that was an amazing business that he has. Another one that just happened recently was a lot of good ones are commercial cleaning companies, right? Where it's recurring. It's a service that's not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon, unless robotics gets really good. And it's something where the margins are really, really good. And this person, it was out in Vegas, and they service all the casinos. So you're getting these large contracts, and you're going out there, and it's got 30 to 35% margins, and it's doing a few million a year. And you have businesses like that. So I would say, again, go back to recession-resistant, recurring revenue, and as barrier to entry. And if I say it, that like you're automatically going, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. That is something that is necessary and sound boring. But also I already understand how the business works just by, what I'm saying. So that's what I would push people towards. Don't all go to accounting firms. Don't all go to blind or solution businesses. But definitely go for things that are home service related or usually really good B2B service related. And again, use those frameworks I talked about, those 3 pillars. Gotcha.
And do you have to be an expert in the areas that you're looking to acquire? Do you have to be at least adjacent to it? Or can it be like, I've never done anything other than pay someone to do my taxes, but I can acquire a CPA firm?
Yeah, so you don't have to be an expert. No. Now, you still need to be able to convince a seller that is a accountant why you're the best person to sell to. So, and as well as the lender to give you $1 million to buy that accounting firm. Right? So you definitely are, well, you don't have to have a background in it. I'm not an accountant. I have no background in taxes or anything else. And yet my team, which has no, my main team doesn't have any people that we've required multiple, right? My first accounting firm I did was with 2 other partners who were both not even close to be financial, right? So you could do it, but you have to be able to sell whatever expertise you do have and when it's going to help that business. So if that business, for instance, if that accounting firm after the owner leaves has no accountants, well, then you're not accountant, how are you going to replace them? But if that same accounting firm has 3 accountants that are staying, then they do already 95% of the work, and the owner was just managing them. Well, then, yeah, you can replace that because now you're just the management aspect of it. And so you're not the one actually doing the taxes. So you have to make sure the deal is structured in a way where someone without the expertise coming in still makes sense to the seller and to the lender or investor who's making a loss on it.
So I think probably a lot of people listening, myself included, be curious, what does your personal day-to-day look like in ownership of these 7+ boring businesses? As the owner of these companies, obviously you've followed all your steps. I'm sure there's great operators in place, but what does your day-to-day look like in the ownership of all of these businesses?
So this is why I wouldn't say this is going to be your first deal. Right? My first deal, I was involved. Put a lot of sweat equity into grow that fitness SaaS company from 10,000. So usually on your first deal, you're going to be more involved in subsequent deals. My subsequent deals now, I only do deals where I'm not involved whatsoever. I might do a quarterly call, maybe a monthly call, but I am not involved whatsoever. And I can do that because now I built up a pipeline. I only look at deals that meet that very narrow criteria. And I'm going in there to having partners, and I'm taking a minority stake most of the time. And I'm walking away area stages. That's how I'm structuring deals now. So when I do 2 deals this year, that is how they're going to be structured because I'm optimizing for my lifestyle, which is not work 50 hours, right? So if I wanted to work 50 hours a week, I could go out there and get way more equity and make way more money, but would have less time for my 4 kids at home and so on. So for me, take it with a grain of salt as now I'm at a different point where every deal I do, I'm spending almost 0 time in that business after the deal is done. At the front end, I'm usually finding the deal, helping with investors and structuring the deal while I'm doing work on the front end. On the back end, I'm doing what's going on. But for you out there getting started, you're going to be working on the front end and you will be working on the back end, at least initially, for your first deal. Once you get some reps under your belt, now I have students that are on the third or fourth acquisition and they're doing exactly what I'm doing. Just they're taking a percentage here, percentage there, getting the deal done, walking away, and then getting a shoot. And so there is a strategy to it. But for most people out there, your first deal, you're going to be prepared to work for a couple months after acquisition where you'll be involved, at least in just that transition period, before you're able to step out to part-time.
Do you have partners you go in on every deal with, or are you going solo on these?
Depends. I had some things where I do solo, but I would say the majority of my deals now are partners. And it's because I'm focusing now more on roll-ups. So I'm not just doing like a single business in one industry. I'm focusing right now on accounting firms, and I have partners that are out there finding the deals, we're structuring the lending aspect, we're bringing investors into it, and we're rolling these up into one large accounting firm. Right? So that is more of a different focus than when I first started. I was just doing a SaaS company, a nail salon. And those were all this separate just deals that the cash flow looked good. Like it was nothing that was cohesive strategy. So those are the differences there.
Does this make you guys private equity, or what are the differences between like when private equity goes in, and that's a huge thing now? Like you look at like Cody Sanchez and all the folks out there in private equity that are buying up small businesses, service-based businesses. Is that what you guys are doing, or is there a big difference between how that operates?
So it's not a big difference in terms of the way it actually happens. It's just a difference in terms of the scale, right? So what we're doing is usually called like self-funded searchers, even though we're not necessarily self-funding, we're using loans or we're using investors. Yeah, a private equity group is an institution. So it's just the difference between me, Ben, the investor, coming in and doing the deal versus ABC Corp, who comes in and does the deal, right? So it's just the difference of terms, even though technically we're really doing the same thing, just they're doing it at a much larger scale, much larger check from an institution that's made up of hundreds, if not thousands of investors, whereas this is just going out there and making deals with each other.
Do you guys find that there's a lot of competition when you go to acquire business? Are you going up against private equity, or is it mostly when you go find a business, they're like, oh yeah, sure, actually I'm pretty interested in, or they may have been listed, so they're definitely interested in selling, but are you finding that there's lots of competition to actually acquire them?
For great businesses that are marketed well, yes, there's going to be a bunch of people like myself throwing offers at it. But by and large, most businesses do not sell. And so if you have right now the baby boomer generation retiring, there's 10 million people that are retiring over the largest generation over the next 10 years. And so there's about a few million businesses that have to exchange hands. Most of them will not sell, just not sell, right? They're just some one man in a truck type businesses, or their finances are just a mess. And 30% of them go to their kids, 30% never sell, and then 30% sell. So there's a supply and demand imbalance. There's so much supply, very little demand, which gives the buyer a lot of power. When you have a good one that's marketed well, it will have other offers on it. And if you want to get past $1 million in cash flow or $1 million EBITDA a year, then you start to have private equity sometimes reaching down and trying to grab those. But normally, most sellers don't like private equity because they're known for coming in and like ripping out all their people and putting in their people. And so they don't like that because they're going to have to still live in that same town where they're going to see their employees all the time, and they'll be pissed at them if they can let that happen. So when you come in as a self-funded searcher and say, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep your own people. I'm going to give them increases in salary. I'm going to do these things. Happy. Usually they'll go with you versus the private equity if it's not that.
Yeah, I was going to say that would make you the more attractive buyer for sure. If I'm a good old boy that's trying to sell my 40-year-old business and I wanted to go to someone who's going to keep it alive and not throw my people to the dogs, then yeah, I'm definitely more interested in talking to you than private equity.
Correct. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, one last question here. What are some, and I want to make sure listeners catch on to this too, what are some red flags when you are, regardless of where you are at in the acquisition stage, what are some major red flags that stick out to you or that you've experienced in your acquisitions where you're like, ooh, hold up, hold the phone. I can't do this deal because of this?
Yeah, most of the time it's going to come down to the two things we mentioned in the diligence process. First one's going to be the buyers. You're going to do a quality of earnings. It comes back where it's materially different than what they were advertising. It just shows you that either they did it on purpose, they lied. So that's the only way to start a business transaction. Or their finances were such a mess they had no idea what they actually made. which is also sometimes sometimes there's an opportunity there. If they're very motivated to sell, renegotiate the price. But if I know that they're purposely lying about the numbers, then I am gonna walk away just because I'm like, what else are they lying about? That's why. Second one is gonna be on the people there. If I can see that there's a toxic work environment, people are miserable there, it's just not a good culture when you go there. That it takes a lot of time to turn the culture out of business. And if this is something that you're not going to be there every single day and really fighting for those people to start to trust you, it's just too much. And so if I see that, I'm out. Another red flag is going to be they don't manage their accounts receivable well and their accounts payable. That's a mess that you can inherit. That is also not fun. I would say most of it's going to be revolve around, or a lot of times you'll find out these businesses that are 40 years old, that especially in industries that are somewhat regulated, that they've been doing things that were not legal for 30 years. And then, but that's why their margins are so good. And then like you get in there and of course you're buying it and you're like, do this the correct way. And then all of a sudden that margin goes from 30% down to you're like, okay, well, with these new numbers, thing is not worth this. I'm not going to be able to run it the same way they ran it because they were literally breaking the law for 30 years, doing it the way they've been doing it. And so you'll find things like that too. But yeah, I'm saying those apply to main red flags.
All right, awesome. Well, Ben, I've probably kept you long enough. This has been super informational, and I think our listeners out there, myself included, have learned a ton about how to go about starting and learning about the acquisition process for buying boring businesses. So I want to make sure that everybody out there today can, if they want to get a hold of you, you had mentioned a community as well. So we're all about abundance here. I want to make sure you get a plug for your community. Where can we reach you? What's that community? And how can we get everybody in on this?
That was good. So the community is named Acquisition Ace. But if you guys want to find out just more about me, follow me. My handle is Ben Kelly 1. So one spelled O-N-E. So Ben Kelly 1. Find me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn at Ben Kelly on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel, again, under Acquisition Ace. You can search Acquisition Ace Ben Kelly. So I would go there, just follow the content, watch it, start to understand exactly the steps. I go on all those channels, I go into it constantly. And if you're interested, there's a link below each one of those profiles that will then take you to where you can learn more about the community and more details on that. But yeah, just follow me on social and go learn a lot more than what I just dropped here today.
Awesome. I love it. Well, guys, make sure you go give Ben a follow. I follow him on LinkedIn. He's a great follow. He's a lot to learn. Ben, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your endless knowledge here. It's definitely extremely valuable, and I think everybody learned a little bit of something today. So thank you again, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Brian, for having me on. This is great.